Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blank Gates. I think it's what, day 94? Is it 94? Amazing. It is Saturday, day number 94 or 95 or something. And we are quickly heading to the end. The thing is that once you start saying we're quickly heading to the end, then it kind of drags out. So I probably should just focus on the task at hand. All right, so yesterday, basically, in the review, the last 10 days of this 101-day challenge, I've been reviewing each of the checklists, one checklist per day. And if you'd like to go into the details of the checklist, of course, you can go back in the playlist, and I talked about each checklist individually. I went through each of the themes, and I had one day for each theme. So if there's any theme that you want to go into more closely, then of course you can go back to the playlist and you can listen again. Now, the first 3 days of this review period, we were discussing managerial duties. So when you are managing people specifically, then you need some methods in order to think about how to work with people, how to characterize the work that needs to be done, and how to characterize the attitudes of the participants. And then you need to be able to think of ways in order to help them. So how can you create an environment where you are managing people and they are putting in more hours on the appropriate types of work, more focus, and then also at the same time they're achieving greater results. At least they're achieving the results that you want them to achieve. And then we talked about some different work styles. Can you change work styles in order to get better results? Can you change work styles in order to help them become more successful, or to help them to put in more effort or less effort for things you want them to stop doing? And then we talked about some aspects of purposes. So the natural purposes that are within people and how to use those purposes in order to help them to develop. Then we moved on. Yesterday, we started talking about how to work with partners. All right, so the first checklist for working with partners is called State Teamwork. And State Teamwork, it's usually used in order to help me and help you to articulate the specific entities involved with the projects that you're working with. So it's very important for you to be able to articulate who are the important parties in this program. All right, so if you're working with a provider, then it's what? It's you, your company, and the provider. If it is a customer, it's your company and the customer. If it's two team members, then it could be two people within the company, two people on the same team. If it's a new job, it could be you and the person who is potentially going to hire you. If you got a new boss, then it can be you and the new boss and perhaps some other departments that you would like to work with, and have your boss be on your side and help you in the process of figuring out how to work with these people. So anytime where there's you and another party, whether it's a joint venture or whatever it may be, then it's useful to articulate the outcomes. Like, what do I want? What do they want? What does each party want for this project? What are the outcomes of this project? And if we achieve the project, if we achieve the outcomes of the project, then what's the next step? What's our next project going to look like? What can we take from this project, and how can we use it in the next project? And then, of course, in our current project, how do we support each other? What's the method of support? What are the responsibilities of each party in order to support each other? And then you can go even into like very minute details and articulate exactly what are the roles of each person that is in in this team, in this department, in this company. Specifically, what are the roles that are important for us to understand in order to really to know who is doing what? Whether it's in a support role directly as two people work together, or whether it's preparatory, the thing that you need to do on your own in preparation of offering that support. So we went through that checklist yesterday. And basically what's going to happen is you're going to find some problems. All right, so it's the same thing that happened with when you're managing people. All right, so when you're managing people, we have these 4 quadrants, you know, and basically you said, okay, this is what we need to happen, and this is what they're doing, and then this is their attitude. All right, so they have a low level of effort and a low level of success. So the first thing we want to do is increase that effort, and then after some time we'll be able to slowly help them to increase their success. All right, so what are we going to do to motivate them? What are we going to do to train them? What are we going to do to help them take ownership for the project? What are we going to do to, I mean, it's like a parent, right? Like the people who really take ownership, they're the people who grow in an organization. But then there's other people, there's a whole bunch of other people who aren't going to necessarily grow. And then it's like, well, how do you work with these people to get the best you possibly can out of them? Now, you can take that idea from a manager's perspective and then you can associate it with the entire team. All right. So our team is here. These are the outcomes we want. These are the reuses we want. This is how we support the other team. These are the different roles. These are the jobs that they do in this specific role. And all of a sudden, what happens? All right. So either you're gonna find a problem. It's usually a problem with people. It could be a problem with a provider. It could be a problem with a department. It could be a problem with a vendor. It could be a problem with anyone. So as you list out these outcomes, I mean, in some cases where you're working with extremely high functioning individuals who understand their job and they succeed at it regularly, then maybe you won't find problems. But you know, you can always kind of stand back and say, all right, so what is this what is this partnership going to look like further in the future? Okay, so in 2 years from now, in 3 years from now, in 10 years from now. So even if you don't have problems right now, certainly you can take the time to start thinking about what the industry is going to look like and how it's going to develop over the years. All right? Okay. Now, one way to think about the future is, now that we're 7 minutes and 30 seconds into this, is using the next checklist. So the next checklist is called State Inventiveness. Now, State Inventiveness, the idea is that although you might not think of yourself as being particularly innovative, you never have a good idea, you never know what to think about anything, you just kind of day in, day out, just do what needs to be done. All right, so but just usually, so if I think of some different situations, like just on the top of my mind, all right, so I talked to a lady today and we discovered, actually, it's interesting because we discovered a problem using State Drive. All right, so she has a couple of issues with some of the people that she's working with. She wants more efficiency. She wants them to take ownership. She wants them to have less mistakes. And then she also has an issue with some other departments and the way that other departments are interfacing with a vendor. All right, so in one case, we use the State teamwork to look at people who are on the same level as us. How do we work with people who are on the same level as us? And managers, we use State Drive to figure out how do we work with people who are on a different level than us, because we're the manager and they are the subordinate. So what we did today was we were able to take the problem with the department and we put it at the top of one column, and we took the problem with the staff and we put it in the other column. So it's interesting, in this case, we're actually using a case from State Drive. We're also using a case from State Teamwork. And now we're going to use the State Inventiveness checklist. Now, State Inventiveness actually has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 different categories. So let's put on hold just for half a second this case that I worked on with a lady today. All right, so in this, what we talked about in the in our videos in the past, we said, okay, what's the first thing that you need to think about when you're talking about innovation? All right, so it's called reuses. So you can't beat somebody until you're at least as good as them. All right, so the idea is to imitate. You need to imitate the best practices. You need to imitate the person who is the best. You need to imitate the product quality, the standards of whatever the best is. You have to be at least as good as them. All right. So don't try to invent the wheel if like, if you don't have a wheel yet. Just go get the wheel, because you're not going to be able to surpass. I mean, maybe some magic, you're going to create something that's better than the wheel. But it's likely that you may have to catch up. All right. So if we talk about successfulness, you may have to catch up to the person who's in the leading position before you can surpass them. The next one is called synergies or integrate. All right, so you can go back to the earlier videos in the playlist where we talked about, I think there was like 4 different ways you can integrate. So you can have your salesperson, they can integrate with your people on the factory floor. They can integrate with the people who have support, the legal department, the different managerial departments, the factory floor, the finance department for talking about costs. And then you can figure out how to integrate with your customer. You can also help your customer figure out how you, with them, can integrate with their customers. Also, you can integrate with your competitors' customers and try to kick out your competitors. All right, so that's talking about integrate. And also, if you're talking about product innovation, then you want to know how your product is going to innovate, how it's going to integrate with other systems. All right, so if you're developing software, how does your software integrate with other softwares? If you have a product, how does your product integrate with other products? All right, so then basically what happens is you start from the bottom, almost the bottom. So first of all, you talk about passivity, ignore. So like, what are some things that you should ignore in the process of innovation? And this is actually the first 2. Just to return to the example with this lady, so the next time we talk, we're going to talk about reuses. All right. So how can you imitate the best practices for how to work with other departments in your company to solve problems with vendors? How can we also work with your staff, provide an environment so that they can succeed? All right. So let's look at some other examples, because sometimes when we're using direct outcomes checklists, we don't necessarily find the answer, but we think through a process, and thinking through the process may lead us to the understanding that we need to do more research. We need to go outside of the book and find other practices. All right, so in this case, where can we imitate the best practices for how to, in this column, work with other departments and vendors, and then how to work with our staff. Also, synergies or integrate. All right, so this is the one we just talked about right now. All right, so how can this lady integrate into the other department? How can she integrate with the vendor? Like right now, it's like she feels like she's too far away. She can't actually, she's making a list of all the problems that she has with the software system, and she's giving it to the IT guys. The IT guys are saying, and the vendor says, maybe the vendor doesn't even hear about it. Who knows? So how can she integrate into this process? Or how can she integrate values or goals or principles? All right, so what is direction? How can she work with the direction? Also working with staff. So how can she integrate with the processes of her staff? And how can she mentor them? How can she help them? How can she help them to set goals? How can she work with them? Maybe it goes back to, remember the Stephen Covey principle, where he has, the top 3, to be proactive, begin with the end in mind. First things first. This is like how to go from dependent to independent. Maybe she has to figure out how to help her staff become independent. But she first has to integrate a little better with them, and then start to integrate different practices and knowledge to help them. All right, so now if you want to create a new, now in this process with this lady, we're actually only going to use 4 principles. All right, we're going to use reuses, which was called imitate. We're going to use synergies, which is called integrate. And then we're also going to use concepts or ideate. All right, so now let's just do some brainstorming. All right, so I'm not asking you to do research online. I'm not asking you to try to figure out how to get in that thing. What kind of ideas do you have? Can you talk to your boss? Can you talk to them? What happens when you just come up with some ideas? Or ignore. What are some specific things you should avoid doing? All right, so write down some things that you should avoid doing, things that you should not do. What are some things with your staff, when you're managing staff, that you should not do? What are some things when you are working with this IT department or the vendor that you should stop doing? All right, so that's 4 of these of these inventiveness principles. Now there's some other principles. So if you're trying to create a new product, then of course you're gonna, all right, first you're gonna ignore, right? So, well, first we talked about you're gonna imitate. Okay, so what can we imitate? And then also maybe we have a product right now and we have a great product, but we need to figure out how to integrate better. Then again, what are some things that we should ignore? All right, so with our product or service, what are some areas of the market or what are some features that we should stop doing or ignore? How about ideate? All right, so let's just talk. How can we improve our product? How can we work better together? How can we find new customers? How can we serve our customers better? How can we improve our customer service? How can we ideate? All right, next is instigate. So if you're sitting at home and you're like, well, I have an idea. So maybe it's time to start to instigate. What instigate means is you need to start calling some friends, find somebody. So for example, in this case, so I'm doing these lessons online. I talk to people face to face. I'm also doing a YouTube channel. And at some point there may be somebody who says, hey, I think it's pretty interesting what you're doing. Let's create a venture. All right. So let's figure out a way to work together. All right. So then I'll say, well, what do you do? How do you want to bring benefit? Because so far there's the author who wrote the book, and then I'm using his book, and I've created some YouTube videos, and I am doing some one-on-one coaching. All right. So what is the product or service that you want to create? Let's ideate, and then next, instigate. If there's a possibility for a partnership, then we're going to create this venture. Now, once we have the venture together, once we start working together, then we invent. We actually, put it down on paper. This is what we are going to do. We're going to invent it. If you are, if you have an idea for a product, you're going to have to invent it. So you got to create the prototype. Now, after you have the prototype, then you want to create that prototype into an actual working product. And then once you have that innovation or that working product, then you need to start to implement. So then you start selling it, you start using it, you start manufacturing it, and then of course, then you bump it back into integrate, which is like, how do you sell that, get it into people's hands, get it into companies. And then of course, you're thinking about imitate again. How do we do sales? How do we do marketing? All right, so let's look at how other people do it and figure out how we can do that. Now, the very last principle, it's called opposition or interfere. So as you're doing these things, so is everybody else. Now, to some degree, you have market demand, all right? So there's always going to be market demand as long as there are humans on the earth. Now, there's always going to be supply. And so you want to try to find it's better if you find like a underserviced industry, a place where there's a lot of demand and perhaps less supply if it's possible. Because if there is a lot of supply and less demand, it's very competitive, and you are going to have to be much better than the competition in order to start winning in that sphere. So as you have these competitors, what can you do to stop them? What can you do to stop them from imitating you? What can you do to stop them from integrating into your customers? How can you stop them from implementing their software solutions or their products? How can you stop them from innovating, creating new products? How can you stop them from instigating? You need to stop other people from joining in their firm and helping them in their process. How can you stop them from coming up with new concepts that are relevant to your market? How can you maybe not stop them? How can you convince them to do things that they probably should ignore? All right, so we've done some review. We've gone through some examples. We've talked about state inventiveness. And so what's next? So after state inventiveness, we got 2 more checklists. So what happens is you're going to come up, basically we got 4 boxes, and some of these boxes specifically imitate, possibly integrate, also ideate, and even ignore, all right? Interfere, all of these different ideas to help you innovate. You need to actually do some research, all right? So you're going to make some decisions based on your assumptions. So let's continue to develop our scenarios with the state assumptions checklist. We're going to talk about databases and how to do research until you have enough information to make a decision. And then the day after that, we're going to go through the state impact checklist. Thank you for joining me. This has been Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates.